Daredevil is a Marvel character who was blinded at an early age, but in return, the rest of his senses were heightened to an extremely high level. Today we are going to explore an alternate universe where Anakin Skywalker is the one who gets these extremely enhanced senses and becomes the Daredevil of Star Wars. Let's get into the story. Our story begins on the planet Krildor as Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Padawan Anakin are tracking down a pirate gang that was stealing Tabana gas from a key Republic transportation port. The fuel was extremely valuable, and the pirates knew it, and while on planet, Obi-Wan was talking with local natives of Krildor, and Anakin saw one of the pirates running away behind them. And so, of course, Anakin decided to go and prove himself by chasing down this pirate alone. Anakin ran through a heavy industrial area until he came upon a room filled with the stolen fuel. But the pirate got the best of him, purposely drawing this 14-year-old Jedi into the room. The Trandoshan pirate shot one of the fuel canisters with an explosive, and all the fuel went up in explosion. Anakin was slammed hard against the wall, and he fell face down on the hard floor. By the time Obi-Wan reached the room, he had found Anakin on the ground, clawing at his eyes, crying out in pain, repeating over and over a phrase that would haunt Obi-Wan forever. Anakin just kept screaming that he can't see, and soon, the young Jedi would go unconscious from shock. When Anakin eventually opened his eyes again, he would see nothing but darkness. Obi-Wan immediately brought him back to the Jedi Temple, and the doctors did everything they could, but Anakin's retinas were burned past repair. It was extremely hard for Anakin to grasp this reality, and Obi-Wan blamed himself for letting Anakin run off. Life without this eyesight would drain Anakin's morale, but this adjustment was hard for a number of reasons. Besides just losing his eyesight, Anakin also lost some of his ability to use the Force, but that was not the only change. Anakin's other senses had increased dramatically, and he had no control over them. The sound of Jedi walking around, the whirring of the medical machines, even the Coruscant traffic outside the temple, it was all so beyond loud that Anakin had to have his ears covered. But then the smell of the old temple walls, bad cafeteria food, and many different Jedi from all over the galaxy was overwhelming. When Anakin touched the floor, he could feel the Jedi walking, he could feel the vibrations of traffic, he could feel the weather, and even taste was enhanced. All of Anakin's senses were overwhelming him day after day as he lay in the temple medical facility, until one day, Yoda would bring the boy to the temple basement. The temple basement was dark, hidden, and reserved for the worst prisoners from centuries ago, but now it was empty and used for special meditation. It was perfect to help calm Anakin's raging senses. But the darkness here wasn't exactly empty. It was pulsing, alive with the whispers of air moving through the stone, the faint stir of the Force, the rhythmic, measured breaths of the Jedi who sat with Anakin, as every day, one of the most highly respected Jedi would come down here, guiding Anakin through meditation. At first, Anakin resented their guidance, their voices, their lessons. None of them could understand what he was feeling. He wasn't just blind, he was drowning in sensation. Every noise was an assault, every shift in air pressure was a pain against his skin. But as the days passed, Anakin forced himself to listen, separate, focus, and he realized something. He realized he wasn't meant to block all of this out. He was meant to use these senses to control them, and soon Yoda's breathing was like an anchor. Plo Koon's masked hum was a relaxing tone. Windu's stillness showed him balance. Shaak Ti's warmth softened the sharp edges of his frustration. And Obi-Wan, for all of his careful restraint, reminded him that even in silence, his emotions spoke volumes, as Obi-Wan was struggling with this adjustment. And as Anakin meditated with the best of the Jedi, day after day, something was changing. He would reach out, not with his hands or his eyes, but with everything else. The chamber was unfolding in his mind, not in color or light, but in shape, motion, and presence. The cold stone of the walls, the vibrations of distant footsteps above, the weight of the air, and in that moment, for the first time since the darkness took him, Anakin understood. He wasn't blind. He could see, just not with his eyes, and he stood up, walking around the basement, using echolocation from his senses to feel the walls and everything around him, and for the first time in a long time, Anakin smiled as he realized life may not actually be over, and the temple no longer felt like a prison. It was a home, it was a place for him to sharpen his new self, and once Anakin mastered the ability to walk and run again, he trained relentlessly, moving faster than ever, his body twisting through corridors, with a flow that was unnatural even to him. The walls were not obstacles, they were paths for him. He could hear the way the air shifted around them, the tiny vibrations of stone, and running up a wall became second nature, kicking off into a spin, landing soundlessly on a ledge above. And now, as Anakin was no longer truly blind, the Force again flowed through him, letting him react before his mind even registered movement. The training dummies stored down in this basement were more than just practice for him. They were opponents, his fists striking faster than he ever thought possible, the impact rippling through his arms. But it wasn't Jedi training. There was no quiet patience, no calm serenity. Instead, there was just raw movement and perfected instinct. Yoda and Shakti guided him during the day, offering wisdom and meditation, but they didn't know about the nights. Nights for Anakin were sweat and adrenaline mixed into something new. It was electric. But unfortunately, the space between Obi-Wan and Anakin would only widen, with Obi-Wan still clinging to the Jedi Code, while Anakin was slipping further from it every day. Obi-Wan had to step away from training Anakin, as Anakin did not follow the path Kenobi would have hoped after being blinded. It was sad for Obi-Wan, and as time went on, he made a point to continue being friendly to Anakin, even while Anakin was brooding and acting like he could go through all of this alone. Obi-Wan would just constantly remind Anakin that when he needs him, he will be there. A year would go by with Anakin training to fight, learning to become something new, and after this year, Anakin would finally leave the temple, finding purpose in the underworld of Coruscant, where he could be himself. The underworld was constant chaos, and Anakin felt the hum of neon lights, the murmur of countless voices. Here, Anakin was unseen, slipping between rooftops, feeling the pulse of Coruscant itself. His senses stretched outwards, picking up the scuffle of feet on the ground, the sound of blades being drawn, sounds of fighting, and soon, Anakin's first fight would come. It was a mugging in the lower levels that was taking place with a gang cornering a terrified Twi'lek woman. Anakin fell through the huge tunnel, and then he moved before he thought, body weaving between the human gang members, every punch landing exactly where he'd intended. One man staggered from a kick to the ribs, another collapsed before he could even raise his blaster. The last one tried to run, but he didn't make it far. Anakin felt his pulse spike before he even turned to flee, lunging and bringing him down in a single practiced motion. Anakin told the lady to go, and all she could make out was a stronger man with what looked like an old robe covering his face. Weeks would pass, with Anakin coming down into the city a couple nights per week, and soon there would be another big fight. This time, a group of black market slavers, heavily armed, were Anakin's target. Anakin felt their heartbeats before he even saw them, and he attacked like a shadow, using their numbers against them, striking in the darkness where they couldn't see. A stun baton crackled through the air. Anakin dodged it by inches, feeling the shift in energy before it even struck, and instead, it hit one of the other members. The fight was brutal, longer, but by the end, Anakin stood victorious, winning without his lightsaber, breathing hard, bruised but pleased, and Anakin was leaving all of the criminals alive before alerting the police of their whereabouts, as he couldn't bring himself to kill them. Some of his Jedi teachings still remained in his heart. And then, later in the year, as Anakin was stronger, quicker, and handling different criminals every night, there was the night with the bounty hunter. She was different, much more skilled and calculated than any criminal down here. Anakin had never faced someone like her. They fought atop a speeding hover train after Anakin stopped her from bombing the train tracks to kill a politician inside of it, and every attack was met with an equal counter, and eventually Anakin ended up grabbing her in an angered force choke, throwing the hunter down into the city, making sure she fell into a garbage pile and survived. Anakin barely escaped that night, limping back to the temple, brushing off his injuries as training accidents when questioned. But the Jedi knew something was going on that Anakin wasn't telling them. And in the third year, the realization for Anakin was undeniable. He knew now that he wasn't a Jedi. The Jedi were guardians and peacekeepers. Anakin had become something new. His fists were speaking louder than diplomacy. His instincts were sharper than any council's wisdom. Anakin knew he was making a real impact, and soon, he finally picked up his lightsaber again. The hum of it was very soothing, but even with the blade in his hand, he knew the Jedi life was not for him, but perhaps he could once more master the blade as a hunter or a warrior. So Anakin left. The underworld called to him, and he was answering. He was a whisper in the streets. Some called him a menace, others a protector. But soon, Anakin would embrace the title given to him by many, the Devil of Coruscant. And upon taking this name, Anakin began searching for bigger and bigger missions, until one day, he found himself in the industrial sector, following tunnels that led underground from the 500 Republica building. The scents of this area were never kind, but especially now with Anakin's smell being heightened greatly. Anakin had been tracking an underground speeder shipment for weeks around here, following its movements through the lower levels, through tunnels Anakin didn't even realize were here. Anakin would track these shipments to the industrial sector underneath the Limerge building, and upon reaching the end, Anakin realized he was in some sort of lair. Anakin observed from the shadows, hearing battle droids, Nimodians, holotables. It was as if the Separatists were creating a base in the heart of the Republic. But the person designing this Separatist lair, Darth Sidious, had been anticipating that the Coruscant Devil could get in his way. So Sidious prepared by recruiting a vulnerable Jedi, Baylan Skoll, to become his ally. Sidious promised Baylan that chaos was to come to the galaxy, and if Baylan aids the Dark Lord, he will have access to unlimited power. It was enticing to the unstable Jedi, and he was trained specifically to fight the Coruscant Devil, a man whose real identity was still hidden. And soon, Baylan would find the Coruscant Devil sneaking through this secret lair. For Anakin, the sound would come first. It was a faint metallic click, like a blade leaving its sheath, and then a whisper of movement, a rush of air as Anakin ducked, barely avoiding a throwing knife that stuck itself in the crate behind him. The next two came even faster. Anakin twisted mid-step, feeling them carve through the space where his chest had been moments before. The way they were thrown, they were perfectly calculated. Anakin landed in a crouch. Then he heard the footsteps. They were heavy with confidence. Anakin could hear his opponent's heartbeat. It was slow, without fear and without hesitation. Baylan Skoll stepped into the dim glow of a malfunctioning overhead light, telling Anakin that he moves well, but he must know that he is outmatched. Anakin didn't need to see the smirk on his face. He could hear it in the way Baylan's voice barely shifted at the corners. And then a knife whistled through the air again, but Anakin had already felt the movement of his wrist, ducking before it even left his grip. He heard the second one leaving Baylan's belt and dodged again, flipping backwards over a crate. Another one came from a different angle, ricocheting off a pipe and aiming for Anakin's spine. Anakin twisted mid-air, feeling the way the air pressure changed around him, snatching the blade with his fingertips before it could pierce him. But Baylan was already there. A crushing boot struck Anakin in the ribs, sending him sprawling. He barely hit the ground before rolling away, dodging another blade that flew where his throat had just been. Anakin surged forward, and he ignited his lightsaber. A flurry of strikes were blocked, sidestepped, and countered with Baylan's own saber. He struck, and he slashed across Anakin's shoulder. Anakin rolled away, gritting his teeth, adjusting his stance. He felt the environment around him, the hum of the machinery, the shifting metal beams overhead, the distant workers oblivious to this battle. And Baylan attacked again, faster. Anakin struck midair, a spinning kick meant to knock him off balance, but Baylan adjusted. He caught Anakin's foot mid-spin, twisting and slamming Anakin into the ground with bone-crushing force. Air exploded from Anakin's lungs, pain flared through his ribs, but he barely had time to react before Baylan's boot drove into his side, sending him skidding across the factory floor. Anakin rolled to his feet, gasping for breath, his world spinning, his body screaming in pain. He'd fought criminals and bounty hunters, trained killers, but Baylan was something else. And Anakin once more heard Baylan's heartbeat. It hadn't changed. No exertion, no stress, no sign he was even trying. Panic crept up in Anakin's spine, but he forced it down. He needed to fight, but it was over. Baylan threw a Magna Guard staff that slammed into Anakin's chest, stunning him, and Anakin slipped from a ledge in this hidden tunnel. He reached out, but there was nothing to grab before falling into cold, suffocating, putrid water. Anakin gasped, choking, his limbs barely responding as the sewage system swallowed him whole. The water burned his wounds, his strength fading. Baylan hadn't just beaten him, he'd studied him. He'd taken everything Anakin was, everything he'd mastered, and crushed it. Anakin's body drifted away with his thoughts unraveling. He wasn't ready. He needed more. And as darkness closed in, one thought burned in Anakin's mind. He needed a suit. And by the time Anakin was thrown out of the sewers by the water, a worker would find his knocked-out body and contact the Jedi Temple after seeing Anakin's lightsaber. Obi-Wan would know immediately what was going on here, so he would find young Skywalker at the sewers, scoop him up, and bring the boy somewhere Obi-Wan guessed he would want to go. When Anakin finally woke up, he was on Mandalore, hidden away in Satine's private home. Obi-Wan had called in a favor, and Satine could never say no to him for long. And when Anakin awoke, he would genuinely thank Obi-Wan, as the two of them would share some food and drinks while Anakin took a few days to heal. But Anakin didn't tell Obi-Wan of his discovery. This was his job to finish. And after a week of recovery, Obi-Wan brought Anakin down to the armory, where Obi-Wan had used some Jedi credits to allow Anakin to have his own armor. Anakin was extremely grateful, and piece by piece, the armor would be fully assembled, and Anakin would stand before it. The red suit was perfect for what he needed to do, and who he needed to be. Anakin would remain on Mandalore for a few more weeks, training in this new suit, becoming one with his lightsaber again, preparing for the inevitable fight that was to come. Obi-Wan was long gone by now, on his own mission, investigating recent assassination attempts. on a Naboo senator Anakin remembered called Padme. Back in his old life, Anakin had dreamt of seeing her again, but now he couldn't let her into this life at this point. But soon, Obi-Wan would be captured on Geonosis, and he would send a message back to Mandalore as his broken signal was not strong enough to go all the way to Coruscant. Obi-Wan would be forced to ask Anakin for help. And Anakin, fully healed, would don the new suit, and he would take off for Geonosis in a Mandalorian transport. It was his first time flying through space since the accident, but this was no problem with Anakin's new abilities and his flying skills. It wouldn't be long before Anakin was on Geonosis, infiltrating the large separatist base that was created and led by Count Dooku. Anakin was planning on how he could take this base down, listening closely, trying to find Obi-Wan, and when Anakin found his presence in the Force, he moved along the walls and climbed around the ceiling until he was close enough to hear Obi-Wan's cell, to hear what was going on inside. Dooku was in there, and he was telling Obi-Wan everything, hoping Obi-Wan might end up joining him, as the two of them were bonded through Qui-Gon. But Obi-Wan was stubborn, refusing to believe anything that Dooku was telling him. But Anakin, even from outside the cell, could hear Dooku's heartbeat. Anakin could tell from heartbeats if people were lying, and to Anakin's surprise, Dooku was telling zero lies. The Sith Lord, Darth Sidious, was in direct control of the Republic, and it began to click for Anakin. The tunnels he investigated led from the industrial sector layer all the way to 500 Republica, the home of all of the Coruscant elite, including Chancellor Palpatine, the man in direct control of the Republic. So, Anakin waited until Dooku left. Then Anakin entered to free Obi-Wan, and Anakin told his old friend to get the Jedi here, do everything possible to defeat Dooku. Anakin said he will take care of the rest on Coruscant, and he left before Obi-Wan could even respond. So, Obi-Wan would sneak around the facility, and finally he would contact the Jedi to have them come here and take down Dooku. Anakin would fly back to Coruscant, and he would spend the flight in meditation, readying himself for the fight or fights that were to come. He would finally return, landing his ship in an underworld hangar, and Anakin would move through the hidden tunnels until he was directly under 500 Republica. But it was never going to be this easy. Before Anakin could go and confront Palpatine, Baylan ignited his lightsaber from behind Anakin, telling him he should have stayed away and he won't escape this time. Anakin put the mask over his face, then ignited his blue saber, and the light showed off his new suit. Baylan wasn't intimidated, and he ran at Anakin. He struck low, and Anakin's new armor was absorbing these blows. Baylan adjusted, but so did Anakin. He felt the shift in his opponent's stance, the slight flex of his fingers, preparing to throw another weapon, the controlled breath, before another counter. So Anakin struck first, a rapid combination of an elbow to the ribs and a spinning strike that sent Baylan staggering. The former Jedi retaliated with a force blast, but Anakin rode the momentum, twisting midair, landing on the tunnel wall. His boots gripped the stone, and for a moment he crouched there, before launching down with the full force of his body, knocking Baylan to the ground. Anakin seized Baylan by the collar, hurling him upward with the force. The man crashed through the tunnel's ceiling, bursting onto the surface of Coruscant with a deafening crack. The sound of startled gasps and the shifting of armored boots told Anakin what he needed to know. The authorities were nearby. Baylan was knocked unconscious and arrested. Anakin turned and he ran up the elevator lift for 500 Republica, where Palpatine was waiting in his suite. Anakin went all the way up, and he used a mind trick on the guards to get past them, and upon entering, Anakin would just ask Palpatine a simple question while listening to his heartbeat. He asked Palpatine if he is Sidious, and Sidious just turned in his chair, smiling with evil intent as he told this Daredevil that he's been awaiting their meeting. He looked into where Anakin's eyes should be as he said he admired what he has become, before revealing he knows who is under the mask. Before Anakin could react, Sidious lunged, bursting through the massive window in this suite and descending to the streets below. Anakin chased him out of the window, tracking Sidious through the currents of the wind, vibrations in the structures, the flickers of breath between the beating hearts of the city's billions of citizens. Anakin felt it all, and he fell faster, using the Beskar-plated tips of his boots to catch the side of a building, rebounding from wall to wall in a descent until landing in the streets below. Sidious was at the center of an open square, and both of their sabers now ignited. Anakin ran in, then twisted into an aerial kick, his own Beskar boot slamming into the Sith's ribs. But Sidious retaliated with a searing thrust aimed at Anakin's heart. Anakin parried, spinning to the side, but Sidious was faster than anything Anakin had ever faced. The Sith was contorting around Anakin, and soon he slithered away, appearing behind Anakin in the blink of an eye. A vicious backhand sent Anakin skidding across the ground, sparks flying as his armor scraped against the pavement. Anakin rolled with the impact, flipping to his feet just in time to dodge a storm of lightning arcing toward him. He felt the air burn as the tendrils crackled past him, striking a nearby speeder and sending it into a spiraling explosion. Dashing forward, Anakin ducked beneath a slashing strike, ramming his lightsaber hilt into Sidious's chest, and Anakin swung with a strike to the throat, but Sidious just grabbed Anakin's wrist and twisted it, causing the lightsaber to fall, and a wave of the Force erupted from Sidious's hand, sending Anakin soaring backward. He crashed against the side of a building, Beskar plating groaning under the force of impact. But before he could recover, Sidious was on him, his blade slashing downward, forcing Anakin into a frantic defense. Holding up his armor plates, a sudden thrust pierced through his armor just below the ribs, searing through Anakin's flesh. Pain laced through his body, and Sidious now poured lightning into Anakin as he gasped for air, nerves burning. But then Anakin felt something. He felt him. Yoda was here. Obi-Wan contacted the temple about the Geonosis situation, but he told Yoda alone that Anakin was going to do something stupid, and he may need help. So Yoda had sat in the council, meditating, waiting, until he felt this clash in the Force. And Yoda now used the Force to throw Sidious into a broken down building, before pulling the wreckage down on top of him. Yoda moved to Anakin, putting his hand on Anakin's wound, and using the Force to heal it enough, as Anakin staggered to his feet. Sidious would climb his way out of the wreckage, flying back in at Yoda and Anakin as they stood together, and the fight raged again through the streets, but the outcome was inevitable. The darkness was failing. Sidious's movements were more erratic. His once unstoppable momentum was broken. Anakin could feel it, the fear, the doubt, and Yoda struck, slashing across the chest of Sidious as Anakin flipped in and kicked the Dark Lord to the ground. Anakin stood over him, his red armor battered, hands clenched into fists, as he went to punch Sidious as hard as he could to end this. But Yoda caught his hand, telling Anakin this is not the way, and Anakin slammed his fist into the ground instead, as temple guards would soon arrive, taking Sidious into custody. Anakin would go with Yoda back to the temple, as Yoda would invite Anakin back into the Order, saying he must learn to control his power, and Anakin would think about this. Soon, the two of them would learn that the Jedi attack on Geonosis was successful. The battle droids were not fully ready, and Obi-Wan guided Windu, Plo Koon, and Kit Fisto into Dooku's lair. Dooku was defeated, and he would die in battle. When Palpatine's trial came, Anakin would play the role of a blind witness, testifying that Palpatine is working with the Separatists and exposing his secret lair that led to his office. The proof was against Palpatine, and he was placed into a vault where the Force was essentially unusable, and he was deep in the temple prison. Anakin found he may have an affinity for the court system. Perhaps in another life, he would have been a lawyer, and the Clone Wars would never truly come along, as the galaxy would learn that the Separatists were created by the Sith, as the corruption in the galaxy was also created by the Sith. With them out of the way, the corruption in the galaxy would be greatly halted, as the Jedi would help to elect a new Chancellor. As for the Daredevil, he would return to the Jedi Temple, and he would once more become a Jedi now that the Council knew his true identity. But Anakin would become a Jedi that stayed mainly in the underworld of Coruscant, protecting the people down here, wearing the Daredevil armor, and being a Jedi that helped the people in the dark, where there was never help before. And Anakin remained here, balancing his ethics as a Jedi with the need to do what it takes to help people for many years to come. And folks, that is our crossover story, the first character crossover I think I've ever really done. I mean, yeah, I know the other guys have certainly done stuff like this, but I'm watching Daredevil and I was like, this could be fun to write about. So I did and made it with Anakin. So I really enjoyed the story. Bullseye, of course, is Balin. Kingpin is sort of, Palpatine. I think it works fine. It's a good little story, and it's fun to write Daredevil's senses. Something I've never got to do before, combining it with the Force, because they're similar, but you combine them and it's just extremely enhanced. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want to see other crossovers. I've got to be knowledgeable with them to do them, of course, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.